Israel's air superiority is granting them a huge leg up in the conflict against Iran. The IDF has successfully bombarded Iranian military targets, including some nuclear sites, missile launchers, and they have targeted Iranian generals and scientists. In fact, the IDF announced that a series of overnight strikes resulted in the death of Iran's newest military leader, who had only been in the position for less than a week. I don't know if they're asking for volunteers or not at this point. So how exactly did Israel gain this superiority? And what else is the Israeli military looking to accomplish while they have this clear advantage? Here to discuss this with me, Brigadier General John Teichert, former Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for Air Force for International Affairs. He is retired. General Teichert, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Tony, thanks for having me on again.
So, General, let's start with this. Israel announcing air superiority. This actually started several months ago in one of their first missions into Iran to begin taking out their air defense systems. Walk us through that.
Tony, it did. And as a response to those ballistic missile and drone attacks from April and October of 2024, Israel took the fight to Iran and very specifically started striking some of those air defense sites that defended Iran, so that when Israel had the opportunity or made the decision to do something more robust in their strike, they would have the freedom to do so. And it's been dazzling just in the last few days to see, as they've struck leadership targets, command and control, and some of those surface-to-air missile sites, that Iran has now become a permissive bombing range for the Israeli Air Force, such that they can strike any target at will and don't have the concern that Iran can even stop them from doing so.
So what does that mean in modern combat? What does that mean that they can fire basically at will anywhere in Iran?
Tony, it is a game changer. Air superiority is defined as freedom to attack and freedom from attack. And the idea that over a sovereign territory like Iran, that the Israeli Air Force can get there, they can loiter over target areas until they find exactly the right target, and then they can strike any target they desire. And it really is amazing in modern history to understand that whoever has air dominance or air superiority will eventually prevail, because there's nothing that the adversary can do to stop them. And in this case, there's nothing that Iran can do to stop the Israeli Air Force from prosecuting targets, as they're in hunting mode now, freely finding targets in Iran.
General, I don't want to take anything away from Israel. I've been amazed, and I've spent a lot of time over there and trained with them years ago when I was in the anti-terrorist business. They're the best at what they do because their existence depends upon it. So I'm not taking anything away from them in this question I'm about to ask. But I do see somewhat of a comparison between Russia. People thought Russia was a lot stronger than it really was because they were doing a lot of, Putin was doing a lot of chest pounding. The same thing from the mullahs. Were we overestimating their capabilities?
Tony, I think there's also a bit of analogy to Hezbollah and what happened last September. And I think it's a combination of factors. I do think that we overestimated Iran's ability to defend itself. But I also think that when you have capable systems, capable personnel, and exquisite intelligence, then you can very quickly create chaos in a modern system like Iran, such that now, though they weren't super strong to begin with, that Israel has found the right nodes to strike that have further taken away the ability of Iran to defend itself.
Well, and that includes the elimination of its leadership. I mean, they did this against Hezbollah and left them leaderless. And I guess in an organization, a terrorist organization like this, in a regime that is heavy-handed from top down, they're not capable of operating in the absence of certain leaders.
Tony, that's exactly right. And in the case of Russia, Hezbollah, and actually China and Iran, that when you take out the leaders in a system that is overly top-down controlled, then it's chaos. That they lose the ability to actually maintain a fighting force, a credible fighting force, because they don't have the orders or the command and control or an understanding at the unit level of what they need to do. And I think Israel knew that. They precisely took out those leadership targets and command and control nodes. And now it's a bit of disarray in the Iranian military about what to do or even how to mount a defense.
All right, General. So the next objective, clearly stated from day one for Israel, is to take out these nuclear sites. Now, we know their capacity to do that in some cases is limited because they just don't have the material to do that. The big bunker busting bombs, real tongue twister. So what is it going to take for Israel to eliminate these nuclear sites, not just to set them back a couple of weeks, but to eliminate the capacity for Israel or for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon?
Tony, from a tactical and operational standpoint, apart from the United States getting involved with those very capable bombs that can penetrate hardened and deeply buried targets, that there is discussion about whether Israel has cyber capability or supply chain hacks like they did against those pagers in Hezbollah, or whether they're willing to engage with the Special Operations Force to go into a place like Fordo and take out those centrifuges and those nuclear elements of capability. But I think it goes back a little bit to what's going on in the mind of the Ayatollah, because I think we and the Israelis have made very clear that either he will eliminate, the Ayatollah himself voluntarily, his nuclear capability, or Israel and the United States will do it for him. And we're getting closer and closer to the idea that if he makes the decision not to do it, then either Israel with our help or with the United States' capability, we can take out those nuclear sites and set them back for good.
So let's talk about those nuclear sites. What is the risk of nuclear contamination from destroying these sites?
Tony, I think the benefit of the fact that they are deep and hardly hardened is that if you strike them, either because you've set off charges from within or you strike them with a bunker-busting bomb, that now it collapses upon itself and likely contains the vast majority of the nuclear material that would otherwise escape. And so I think there is a benefit that because they're so buried and so deep, that once you make the decision to take them out, to some extent it's self-sealing and will not release some of that nuclear capability that otherwise we may be concerned about.
General, over the last 3 nights, the number of missiles that have come from Iran into Israel have been decreasing, which would suggest that their capacity is being whittled down by Israel's forces. What remaining capacity do they have to hit Israel during the course of each evening? Are we close to seeing them being unable to respond?
Tony, intelligence suggested that before this conflict 5 days ago, there were about 2,000 ballistic missiles in the armories in Iran. They've launched about 400 of those against Israeli targets over the course of the last 5 days. There are probably estimates that another 800 of those have been destroyed by the Israeli Air Force or military, which means that they're starting to be on the tail end of their capacity to continue to launch ballistic missiles. In fact, I think right now the Ayatollah is weighing, does he launch a few at a time and allow the remaining ones to trickle out? Because otherwise he only has 1 or 2 large salvos left before he's out. And once he's out, then now they don't have an ability to defend themselves, and they don't have an ability to take the fight to Israel or the United States. And I think he's in a precarious position that he is on the tail end of having the ability to launch any ballistic missiles from Iran.
I mean, I would think that this has been, I don't know if they can express embarrassment, but I mean, it's decimated Iran and their capabilities and all of their boasting that they do. I would be shocked if this did not lead to a regime change in Iran.
Tony, 2 months ago, if we rewind, intel reports indicated that the primary reason why the Ayatollah came to the negotiating table with the United States to talk about his nuclear program is because he was concerned about regime stability, because the economic conditions in Iran are dismal. And there is widespread dissatisfaction amongst the Iranian population, and especially now that they are getting struck brutally by the Israeli military and economic conditions are getting worse and worse, that it makes it more and more likely that there will be a bubbling from the bottom up that will remove the Ayatollah. And ultimately, that would be a huge success as long as the successor to the Ayatollah is willing to forego any nuclear ambitions.
Well, and that's a wild card, because we've seen this story before, where one rogue government is replaced with another one. Although I think the Iranian people are a little bit different in this scenario. In this case, they understand and can remember freedom and what it's like, and I think they would be willing to fight for that freedom in an incoming administration or government that they might have an option to choose.
Tony, and I think that's especially true if it doesn't come the regime change from our hands and striking the Ayatollah, but if ultimately it bubbles from the bottom up. And I think the Iranian people have such an amazing history. They're such robust and resilient people that have been shackled since the revolution in 1979. And I think that given an opportunity based on a high level of dissatisfaction and a weakness of the regime, then there's a real possibility, especially as Israel continues to strike economic targets and internal security targets, that they're able to topple the regime.
Yeah, I think Iran is much different than Syria, Iraq. The people there are much different, a longer history of understanding what freedom looks like. We just have a few minutes left, General Teichert. Timing is everything in war. And it would appear to me that Israel, that launched out on their own unilaterally, as the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said last week, they saw the window closing and that this was their time. If they wanted to eliminate this threat, they realized they had to move, is my assessment. What is yours?
Tony, I think that you're right. And all intelligence reports, open source, indicate that this was an imminent existential threat. And by the way, not just for Israel, but for all of humanity in the United States. We owe Israel a debt of gratitude for seizing upon this window of opportunity to strike at the Iranian nuclear program and ultimately the Iranian regime. And that window was closing. And I love the idea that President Trump very clearly gave the Iranian regime 60 days to negotiate. But they didn't negotiate in good faith, that they drug their feet. And ultimately, on day 61, Israel struck. And right now, we're not in a position to be looking for a negotiated settlement or a ceasefire. That we must demand, like the president said, unconditional surrender. And that means a complete and immediate destruction of the Iranian nuclear program. And either the Ayatollah makes the decision to do it on his own, or he asks for our help, or we're on the verge of us, the United States, taking care of their nuclear program once and for all, because it was a threat, an existential threat to all of humanity.
About 30 seconds left. President suggesting or talking like more U.S. direct involvement. What role would the U.S. play? What would that look like, very quickly?
Tony, I think we've done a great job supporting Israel defensively, providing intelligence, providing them weapons. And then the president has a decision to make whether the United States helps Israel by striking some of those deep and hardly buried targets. I don't think we're there yet, because I do think there's this opportunity of dissatisfaction within Iran, where if the United States helps by striking internal security sites and some of the economic and energy sites, that we give the Ayatollah to make a decision that's in his best interest to relinquish that nuclear program, or for that bottom-up bubbling of dissatisfaction to overthrow the regime.
All right, very good. We'll pray to that end. General Teichert, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Tony.